Hey guys, JV here with another Destiny 2 tips and tricks video. This time we're looking at one of the most frustrating encounters in the raid. Just a heads up, this is your place for daily Destiny 2 content here on YouTube, so hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for Destiny 2 tips and tricks videos. Today I'm going to show you how to complete the Pleasure Gardens dog encounter in the Leviathan raid, and for many groups, this is what stops them in their tracks and gets them stuck for hours upon hours. So let's get into it. The central objective is to kill all of the named elite dogs that spawn in the Pleasure Gardens. Now, this is much easier said than done because it requires a lot of preparation, communication, and just experience. If there's anything I can say to prepare you for this encounter, it's that you need experience in order to be successful. It's either that or be really damn lucky. The best way to describe the Pleasure Gardens is that it's a glorified game of hide and seek. It's like the Gorgon maze in Vault of Glass, but you have to kill the enemies. So your goal is to not be seen until it's time to strike. So once again, killing all the dogs will complete this encounter. We're going to start by explaining teams, and I'm going to mention some things that you may not understand yet, and just hang in there, I'll go into more depth later. So for the Pleasure Gardens, you'll need to split your raid group into two teams. One is responsible for guiding the others using the prism weapons, so we'll call that one the Prism team. The other carries the pollen to the spores, so we'll call them the Spore team. Generally speaking, you want the two guardians with the most experience in the raid on the Prism team so they can guide the others. However, the only advantage the Prism team has is better lines of sight, so you can also have very experienced players leading the Spore team as well. It's really up to your group. And for the sake of this video, we're going to assume that the Prism team is directing the Spore team because that's usually how it goes down, at least in my experience. The other four guardians will belong to the Spore team. Now let's talk about each team's individual responsibilities. On the Prism team, you have several duties. First is to guide the Spore team from above. You're able to do this by jumping between the rocks above the stage and using your lines of sight to direct the Spore team around the map. Second is to use the Prism weapon to shoot and activate the spores. You're only able to use the Prism weapon if you're standing in one of the wells of light scattered across many of the rocks around the stage. Shooting the spores with the Prism weapon will grant your team a buff, which is essential to killing the elite dogs. Your third responsibility is to kill the Cabal beast handlers that spawn after each spore. They will harass the Spore team and prevent them from reaching spores, so you'll need to kill the handlers as soon as possible. Fourth, you need to damage the dogs when the time comes. We'll talk more about that, but this cycle of 4 responsibilities is going to repeat several times in order, so prepare for that. Now let's talk about the Spore team. You have 2 responsibilities if you're on this team. First is to bring the royal pollen to the glowing spores. This involves following the instructions of the Prism team and not getting seen by the dogs. So there are a total of 6 elite dogs roaming around the gardens. They have very poor vision, but a pretty good sense of hearing, and I guess smell if you want to imagine that too. A few things to keep in mind if you're part of the Spore team. Never sprint and never double jump. Those things will trigger the dogs and end the round for you. Also, it doesn't matter if you crouch or not because the dogs don't see well, so crouching just makes you slower than you need to be. Don't crouch walk even if you feel like you need to. Your second responsibility is also to damage the dogs, and this will happen at a very specific time that we'll go over just a second here. So we've gone over some broad strokes while explaining the teams. Now we're going to fill in the gaps there, go in depth through each phase of the fight from start to finish. In order to start this encounter, you'll need to kill all of the ads that spawn in this room. You'll find a mix of Cabal beast handlers and loyalist war beasts around, I believe, like 8 to 10 of them. And once all of them are dead, the Prism weapons will spawn at the top of the safe room under Callus's golden statue. Once the Prism team picks up their weapons, the encounter will begin. At this point, the Prism team will want to stand on the safe room door, which is kind of like a trap door that opens downward. So it'll open up and drop them down into the safe room. So before we continue, let's talk about power weapons. Since it requires a lot of damage to kill each dog, everyone on your team needs power ammo for their power weapons. The beast handlers that spawn at the beginning have a chance to drop that power ammo you need. So a popular method is to wipe your entire raid group until everyone fills up on power ammo from those handlers. Just be sure that everyone is full before you begin. At the start of the encounter, a few things will happen. All 6 dogs will spawn and begin their patrol routes throughout the map. The safe room door will open and drop the Spore team to the bottom. Inside, the Spore team will find glowing purple relics called royal pollen. Each member, 4 of them, will need to pick one up to escort safely to the spores. Up top, it's the Prism team's job to identify the first location for the Spore team to go to. At the start, 2 spores will glow purple around the map. It makes sense for each Prism team member to check the side that they started on, the side that they grabbed the Prism weapon from. So if you grab the left Prism weapon, scan the left side for the first glowing spore, and right Prism Guardian should do the same on their side. At this point, you'll need to determine which spore to head to first. Before we go any further, here's the map I used to complete this encounter. This was made by user Mark the Marky on the Destiny the Game subreddit, so I've left a link to the post and the map in the description below. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is a fantastic reference for spore locations, dog paths, and general callout locations. If you're ever confused or need to explain something for clarity with your team, I highly recommend that you share this map with your entire raid group. As you can see, there are 8 total spores represented by the pink flowers. In order to make things easier, my raid group used these callouts to identify each one of them. On the left side, if you split the map in half, on the left side, we have close left at the bottom, mid left near the far left of the map, far left at the top, and then the one in the green area that we call trees. On the right side of the map, we have close right at the bottom, mid right, which is furthest right, and then far right at the top. Then stone pyramid is the one closest to the middle in between these huge rocks. My team also used these callouts to identify certain locations. Stone pillar is each of the rocks near close left and close right spore, so you'll need to say stone pillar left or stone pillar right. Trees is obviously the big tree in the middle left portion of the map, and stone pyramid is the right middle spore location that we already talked about. You don't have to use these specific callouts, but develop some kind of terminology with your raid group to communicate effectively between the teams. Back to the beginning, at the start, 2 spores will be glowing, one on the left and one on the right side of the map. Usually you want to start with the ones closest to the safe room at the bottom. Once your group has determined which spore to head to first, the Prism team must direct the spore team safely. Prism Guardians must hop along the rocks to the well of light closest to the first spore so they can shoot it. A couple of things to keep in mind here. For the most part, you only need 1 Prism Guardian per side at a time. When you have 2 jumping across the rocks, it increases the risk that one will miss their jump, hit the other one, fall to the ground, and alert the dogs. On the same note, if you're a Prism Guardian, do not double jump directly above a dog. They will hear you, and that will end the first phase prematurely. So use your callouts, avoid the dogs, and reach the first spore safely. Now, this is super important. The glowing spores open when the first Guardian gets in close range, and I can't really tell you what the range is, you just kind of have to get a feel for it. The Prism team has a 3 to 4 second window to shoot the spore with the Prism weapon, or you will lose the spore. So this means that the spore team needs to stay together and run as a group. Do not split up no matter what. Once all 4 members of the spore team are in close enough range, the Prism Guardian needs to stand in the light and shoot the spore in order to activate it and grant the Empowering Spores buff. This buff applies in stacks of 12 and works like a damage buff, so the more stacks that you get, the more damage you will do. Also, once you activate the spore, Cabal Beast Handlers will spawn, one on either side of the map. They have designated spawn locations shown by the map we referenced earlier. It's the Prism team's job to take out these guys ASAP, and once again, they have to be standing on a well of light in order to deal damage with the Prism weapon. If the Beast Handlers hop down and start harassing the spore team, the groups must coordinate on how to take them out quickly so they don't disturb this process. After the first spore, it's on to the next one, which should be on the other side of the map. And most of the time, it makes sense to return to the safe room because it's the safest path back, but do whatever makes the most logical sense between locations. Ideally, you're going to repeat this process undetected by the dogs 3 to 4 times before the timer runs out, reaching 36 or 48 stacks of Empowering Spores. The cue to let you know when you're out of time is a notification that reads "The Royal Beasts Grow Restless" in the bottom left. So at that point, you only have a few seconds to get to another spore before the timer runs out. So when either your team is seen by the dogs or this timer runs out, that marks the end of Phase 1. Phase 2 is all about damaging the 6 elite dogs. Again, the number of spores you were able to activate in Phase 1 determines the amount of damage you're able to deal in Phase 2. More spores, more stacks means more damage. Now this is super important, so listen up. The first few times you reach Phase 2, do not kill the dogs. All dogs must die in the same phase or you will fail this encounter. Instead, use your power weapons and damage each dog down to 1 bar of health, then move on to the next one. In case you're wondering, you are safe to activate supers, but practice a little common sense with them. For example, don't Nova Bomb a dog that has 1 bar of health. That just doesn't make sense unless you're trying to kill them. In terms of who is damaging which dog, my team just fanned out and tried to reach as many dogs as possible in the first few rounds. However, your team might want to assign 1 dog to each person if that makes things easier. In Phase 2, you have around 35 to 40 seconds to damage the dogs. In order to keep track of this, you'll need one person to either keep a timer or have a really good grasp of how long that is. At around 25 to 30 seconds, this person needs to tell everyone to head back to the safe room where the pollen spawns. And this is important too, you need to hop through the top. The bottom doors will not be open. So when the timer is up, the safe room door will close on the top and everyone outside of it will die. If you have 1 or 2 people die per round, that's usually okay, so don't panic. I wouldn't force a wipe unless you actually wipe entirely, because you want to get as much experience with this as possible. After the reach the safe room in time sequence finishes, the doors will open again, and it's time to repeat Phase 1. So you'll repeat each phase until it's time to kill the dogs, and I believe the maximum number of cycles is 4. I could be wrong on that, but that's as far as my raid team went. And ideally, you want to have 3 to 4 stacks of the buff each time and get as much damage on the dogs as possible, but it doesn't always happen that way. Someone will get spotted by the dogs, a Prism Guardian will miss their jump. I've seen it all. A lot of things can end it early, so most of the time it will take 3 cycles of damaging the dogs and the 4th one to finally kill them. Once you know that all of the dogs are 1 bar or lower, that means the next Phase 2 is time to kill all of the dogs. And once it's time to do that, everyone must spread out and find a dog to kill. At this point, it's probably a good idea to designate dogs to each person just to make sure all 6 get killed in time. So once each dog is killed, have their respective guardians call it out so the rest of the team knows what's going on, and if you've killed your dog already, head to the nearest one that's still alive and help your teammates. This is much easier said than done, just takes a lot of experience to get down. Also, referring back to the map that I showed you guys, the dogs will eventually make their way back to one position during Phase 2, and that's the position that you'll always find them in unless they bug out and glitch. So remember where they are, go to that location and damage the dogs. Before we wrap this up, let's talk about a few things that could go wrong and probably will go wrong. What will trip you up the most in the beginning is the Spore team getting spotted. It takes a while to know what you can and can't get away with in terms of sneaking around the dogs. You just need experience. So once you've kind of gotten that down, after that point, what gets you is the buggy AI. These dogs will decide to jump and run around erratically whenever they feel like it. Sometimes they'll go off their path. Sometimes it's completely out of your hands and you'll fail an entire round because the game decided you don't deserve to win. So if that happens, take a deep breath, wipe and reset. Start from the beginning. And finally, don't be a douche to teammates that get spotted. This is something that takes time and patience. You will not complete this on your first try unless you're the Legend 27 or Slayer Age. And if you happen to, by some random miracle chance, just realize that you're a lucky SOB. Once you complete the pleasure gardens, take a sigh of relief, pat yourself on the back, and head to the chest. Inside, you'll find Callus tokens, a chest key, and possibly a legendary raid weapon. Not sure if that's guaranteed. I happened to get the Sins of the Past rocket launcher, so I was pretty happy with that. Alright guys, today I showed you how to complete the pleasure gardens dog encounter in the raid. In the comment section below, tell me what gear you've gotten so far in the Leviathan raid. My only piece is this rocket launcher since I haven't beaten it yet, so share your loot in the comment section below. Next time we will cover more Destiny 2 here on the channel, so stay tuned for daily Destiny 2 tips and tricks videos. If you learned something new, remember to hit that like button and subscribe for lots of Destiny 2 content. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.